I didn't write this for sympathy. I didn't write it to be believed. I wrote it because the lake is still there. And sometimes I wake up with my mouth full of cold air like I've been holding my breath for hours. And I know I don't have much time left before I stop knowing what's real. Not real. Real. Not real. If you're listening to this at night, with your lights off, do not pause it when you feel uncomfortable. That's how it starts. You tell yourself you'll come back later. You tell yourself you'll finish it in the morning. And then you don't finish it at all, because something about the words stays behind in the room with you. And before we go any further, I want you to do something for me. If you like slow burn horror that crawls under your skin and refuses to leave, make sure you subscribe right now. Because I'm going to tell you something I was never supposed to say out loud. And once it's said, it can't be taken back. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. City, country, coastline, mountains, anywhere. I need to know how far this reaches. I need to know how far it can travel. Because Lake Superior is not just a lake. It is weight. It is silence. It is a mouth that never closes. People think they understand water. They swim in it. They boat on it. They take pictures of it when the sun turns it into glass. They point at the horizon and say it feels like the ocean, like it's just a pretty trick of scale. But you don't understand a thing until you've gone under it with a mask pressed to your face and a regulator between your teeth, breathing in measured pulls, watching your own bubbles claw upward like they want to escape you. You don't understand it until the world above becomes a rumor and the world below becomes the only truth you have. I was a harbor unit diver. That's what my paperwork says. That's what the certification cards used to say when I kept them in my wallet like they meant something. That's what the patch on my jacket said before I buried the jacket in a storage bin and pushed it to the back like it could hide. Harbor unit divers don't go looking for treasure. We don't go exploring wrecks for fun. We don't chase ghosts. We recover. We clear hazards. We pull cars out of water when the road curves too sharply in winter and somebody's headlights vanish into black. We find what the lake keeps, and Lake Superior keeps a lot. It keeps boats that left dock in bright weather and came back as names on a list. It keeps snowmobiles that cut across ice that looked strong enough until it wasn't. It keeps fishermen who step out too far and hear the cracking sound only once. It keeps secrets so well that people start believing the secrets never existed. They say the water is so cold it preserves things. That's the polite way of saying it doesn't let go. That's the human way of pretending the lake is doing us a favor. I used to say the same thing. Then I saw the car. I'm going to tell you what I saw as carefully as I can, because if I rush it, I start changing it. If I tell it too cleanly, it stops sounding real. And if it stops sounding real, I start to wonder if it ever happened at all. Not real. Real. Not real. This happened off a harbor road that locals treat like a shortcut, even though the curves are narrow and the shoulder drops away into trees and rock, and past that, the lake. You wouldn't notice the danger in daylight. At night, you only notice it when it's too late. Dispatch called it in as a possible submerged vehicle. No confirmed occupants. No plate number. Just a report from someone who swore they saw taillights blink, and then nothing. Those calls usually end one of two ways. Either it's nothing, or it's exactly what you think it is. We arrived at the access point just after dawn, when the sky was bright but the world still looked unfinished. The water was flat in that unnatural way it gets sometimes, like it's pretending to be calm. Fog sat low, not thick enough to be dramatic, just enough to make everything quieter than it should have been. Quiet is normal at a lake. But this quiet was wrong. It ate sound. Even our voices felt muffled, like we were speaking through cloth. We did what we always do. We set up perimeter tape. We checked the shoreline for tracks. We took the boat out slow and steady. Sonar sweep, grid pattern, all of it. I remember thinking how ordinary it felt. I remember wanting it to stay ordinary. When the sonar hit the shape, it was too clear. Too clean. A car, upright, settled on the bottom as if it had been placed there by someone with careful hands. Upright is strange. Most vehicles roll or tilt when they enter water, especially on a drop. They catch current. They wedge into rock. They don't sit like they're waiting. But this one sat like it had been parked. The distance readout said it was deeper than the shoreline should allow. We checked our location again. We ran the sweep again. Same result. Deeper than it should have been. My partner on deck tried to crack a joke about Lake Superior being hungry, but it came out thin. Nobody laughed. I geared up anyway. That's what you do. You keep moving. You keep procedure between you and the thought that something is wrong. Mask, regulator. Weight belt. Dry suit seals. Check the line. Check your air. Check your tether. The same steps I'd done so many times they lived in my hands. On the surface, the fog clung to everything. On the surface, the lake was silent. I dropped backward into water so cold it didn't sting. It didn't burn. It erased. The first seconds are always the worst. That shock when your body wants to seize and you have to remind it, you're trained. You're sealed. You're fine. Your breath turns loud inside your own head. The light dies quickly in Superior, even when the sun is up. A few feet down, the world becomes gray. Then it becomes dark. I followed the line down into the dim, watching my own bubbles rise like pale insects. I moved slow to avoid kicking up silt, but the water was already heavy with it. Fine particles hung in the beam of my light like drifting ash. The bottom appeared like a thought becoming solid. Rock and sediment, scattered branches, old debris. A place that feels untouched until you look closely and realize it's full of leftovers. And then, my light touched metal. The roof first, then the rear window, then the trunk. The contours of a sedan with its paint dulled by water and time. It looked newer than it should have. But that's the thing people don't understand about Superior. The cold keeps things from becoming what they should become. I drifted closer. The car was intact. No crushed roof. No shattered windows. No obvious impact marks. The doors were closed. The interior was dark. I remember the moment before I saw anything unusual. The moment where my brain still believed this was another job, another recovery, another entry in a file. I remember feeling almost relieved. Then my beam slid across the driver's side window, and something pale pressed back. At first I thought it was a reflection. Then I thought it was a piece of fabric drifting against the inside of the glass. Then I realized it had fingers. A hand, flat against the window from the inside. Not floating. Not limp. Pressed. The palm was spread wide. The fingers were splayed as if pushing, as if trying to make contact, as if the glass was the only barrier between two worlds. I froze. That sounds dramatic. But divers do freeze, even trained ones. Even the ones who tell you later that fear has no place underwater. Because underwater, when you stop moving, the silence gets closer. My breath sounded like machinery. My heartbeat felt like it was shaking my mask. I held the light steady, because if I moved it away, I knew it would change. I knew my mind would try to fix it, try to make it something else. Not real. Real. Not real. The hand didn't move, but the pressure marks on the glass did something that made my stomach turn cold in a new way. The fingertips left faint, foggy ovals, like warmth on a window in winter. That's impossible underwater. Warmth doesn't linger like that. Not there, not in that cold. I told myself it was sediment. I told myself it was my eyes. Then another hand appeared beside it. Then another, not waving, not pounding, just pressing. As if they'd been there the whole time and only now had decided to let me see. I backed away without meaning to. My fins stirred the silt. The beam of my light became a storm. The car faded into murk. And in that murk I felt something shift. Not the car. Not the water. Something in the space between my face and the glass, like the lake itself, leaned in. I yanked the line twice, the signal to bring me up. My arm did it before my brain agreed. I kicked upward hard enough to burn. I didn't look down again. On the way up, my radio crackled, but I couldn't understand words. I only heard breathing, and for a second I wasn't sure it was mine. When I broke the surface, the air felt wrong. Thin, too warm, like it didn't belong. Hands grabbed my harness and guided me to the boat. Somebody asked what I saw. Somebody asked if I found occupants. I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out. Because the truth was sitting behind my teeth, heavy and slick, and I knew if I said it, the lake would hear. Not real. Real. Not real. I finally managed one sentence, and it was the most useless one I could have said. There's a car down there. They stared at me like I'd made a joke. And then, because I couldn't stop myself, because my mind was trying to force the world back into rules, I added the next part. The windows are intact. That got their attention. A car submerged with intact windows means trapped air. It means something to check. It means urgency. They started talking over each other, planning the recovery, planning the next dive, the angles, the lift bags. It became procedure again. Noise again. Control again. And I let them. Because I still hadn't told them about the hands. Because I was trying not to remember the way they looked. Because I could still feel the shape of their pressure against the glass. And the worst part was this. They didn't look like they were trying to get out. They looked like they were waiting for someone to come in. By the time they had me out of my gear, the fog had lifted enough to show the shoreline properly. Gray rock, dark pines. The thin road cutting along the edge like a careless thought. If you didn't know what was under that water, you'd think it was peaceful. That's how Lake Superior keeps itself. It lets you believe in peace. Someone handed me a bottle of water I didn't drink. Someone asked again what I'd seen. Their voices came from far away even though they were close, like sound was still being swallowed, just more politely now. I told them it was a vehicle, upright, intact, deeper than expected. I told them visibility was poor. I told them the current was still. All true. All safe. They wanted more. They always do. They want the story to settle into a clean shape, the kind that fits into reports and training manuals. They want a reason the lake took something, and a reason it might give it back. My supervisor asked if there were occupants. I looked past him at the water. Not real. Real. Not real. I said I couldn't confirm. That was the wording. That was the language of procedure. It meant I hadn't seen bodies. It also meant I wouldn't explain why. He didn't push, not right then. He watched me with that look people get when they're deciding whether you're rattled or just cold. Then he turned away and started assigning tasks. They treated it like a standard recovery. 2 dives, minimum. 1 to assess and rig. 1 to attach lift bags and guide the car up slow enough not to spin or roll. Evidence protocol if we found anything inside. County sheriff notified. Tow truck staged. All of it. I stood on the deck and tried to make my hands stop trembling. The lake did something strange while they talked. It stayed smooth. Boats passed farther out and left wakes that should have reached us as gentle ripples. The ripples approached and then seemed to soften, as if they were being absorbed before they could touch our hull. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, but it made me feel like we were sitting in a place that had been cut out of the rest of the world. Someone laughed about it. A small laugh, a nervous laugh. Then they stopped, because laughter didn't seem to belong there. The sheriff arrived in a truck that crunched gravel and made the first loud sound of the morning. He leaned against the tailgate and asked practical questions. How deep? What kind of vehicle? Any sign of a crash? Any witnesses? When my supervisor said the vehicle was intact and upright, the sheriff's eyebrows rose. He looked at the lake the way people look at a locked door. Then he did something that made my throat tighten. He asked if we had a missing person attached to it. Attached. Like a rope. Like a name. No one did. Dispatch had nothing reported overnight. No family calling. No plates. No abandoned wallet found on shore. No footprints in the wet sand. No phone ping. No last known location. Just a vague, shaky call from someone who said they saw taillights blink and disappear. The sheriff shrugged like he didn't like that. But he didn't seem surprised. He said a few things about how people don't always get reported right away. He said the lake pulls people off the map sometimes, and the map takes a while to notice. Then he left, and his truck sound faded, and it was quiet again. Quiet enough that my breathing seemed too loud in my own ears. Not real. Real. Not real. I didn't think about folklore at first. I'm not a person who reaches for myths when I don't understand something. Harbor work teaches you to respect the environment, not romanticize it. But you hear things. You hear old-timers talk when you're loading gear at dawn. You hear fishermen in diners, voices low, telling stories like they're passing down warnings disguised as entertainment. You hear about the lake like it's a thing that watches. People along Superior have names for moods of water. They talk about the gales of November like they're yearly feasts. They talk about wrecks as if the lake chose them. They talk about the places where boats go quiet, where compasses don't behave right, where fog comes in too fast. There's a story that gets told in different ways in different towns. In one version, a man goes missing on the ice. In another, a girl disappears from the shore. In every version, someone sees hands under the surface after the fact. Hands reaching up, hands pressing, hands waving in slow water. It's always framed like a warning. Don't go out alone. Don't trust the ice. Don't stay after dark. I used to roll my eyes at those stories. Then I saw hands pressed against a window deep underwater, and the stories didn't feel like stories anymore. They felt like delayed explanations. The plan was for another diver to go down next. Standard rotation. Don't send the same person twice if you think they might be rattled. I should have been relieved. But I wasn't, because if I didn't go back down, I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't correct it. I couldn't prove my eyes had lied. The human mind hates an open loop. It wants closure. It wants a shape. I told my supervisor I was fine. I told him the cold just got into my hands. I told him I wanted to do the rigging dive myself because I'd already found the vehicle and I knew the location. That was a reasonable argument. That's the kind that works when people don't want to question you too deeply. He hesitated. Then, he nodded. We gave it time. We let the surface crew recheck sonar. We adjusted our anchor. We reviewed the line. We waited for the sheriff to call back with anything missing person related. Nothing. The second time I suited up, the dry suit felt tighter, like it knew my body wasn't as steady. The gear checks took longer. Every strap felt like it could slip. Every buckle sounded too loud. I kept looking at the lake and expecting to see something break the surface. Nothing broke. It just waited. When I went in again, the cold was immediate. The water swallowed me with the same indifferent pressure, and my body tried to lock up in panic before training pushed it down. Down. The light dies quickly. The world narrows quickly. The lake becomes everything. I followed the line, and the descent felt longer than it should have. The depth gauge ticked down with calm precision, but something inside me insisted it was taking too long. I looked at my wrist twice, then a third time, convinced I'd misread it. Not real. Real. Not real. The bottom appeared again. The beam caught silt, branches, debris. But the car wasn't where it should have been. That hit me first. Not the hands, not the dread. The fact that the shape wasn't there. I swept my light left, then right, then widened my search pattern like we train. A few meters out, then more. Nothing. The tether line tugged gently from above. My supervisor's voice crackled faint through comms, asking for status. I didn't answer right away. My mouth was dry even with the regulator. My breath sounded faster than it should. Then, my light touched metal. It was there. It hadn't moved far. Only enough to make me doubt. Only enough to make me feel like I'd misremembered the world. The car sat in the same upright position, angled slightly now, as if it had settled into a new pocket of sediment. Everything about it looked the same, except the windows. They weren't dark anymore. Not bright. Not lit. Just not empty black. The interior held a thickness, a dimness, like smoke trapped in glass. I hovered closer, forcing myself to go slow. I was there to rig the frame, to find a stable point for lift straps. That was the job. Focus. Procedure. But my light slid to the driver's side window before I could stop it. The hands were gone. For a moment, relief rushed through me so hard it made me dizzy. The hands weren't there. It had been silt. It had been my mind. It had been. My beam shifted slightly, and something pale appeared at the edge of the glass. A handprint. Not a hand. A print. 5 fingers, pressed flat, clearer than a smear of sediment, clearer than a random pattern. It looked like someone had touched the inside of a window on a cold day and left behind a faint foggy shape. Underwater. Impossible. I moved the light away and then back again, like I could reset my vision. The print remained. Then, as I stared, another print formed beside it. Not appearing from movement, not sliding into place. Forming, like the glass was remembering touch. I pulled back hard enough to kick up silt. The water bloomed into cloud, and in that cloud I felt it again. That shift in the space around me, that pressure like a tension. My comms crackled again. This time, I heard a sound beneath the static that didn't belong. A slow, patient tapping. One tap. Then a pause. Then another. Not on my helmet, not on my tank, not on anything I could feel. It sounded like it was coming from the car. I forced myself to approach again, fighting the instinct to flee. I told myself the tapping was debris, a branch moving, a loose trim piece. Not real. Real. Not real. I aimed my light at the passenger window. There was a shape inside now. Not a body. Not clearly. Just a suggestion of something close to the glass, like a silhouette leaning forward. I couldn't see its face. I couldn't see details. Just the sense of proximity. And then my light caught the windshield, and I saw something that made my mind tilt. There were marks on the inside of the windshield too. Faint arcs, smears, the kind you'd see if someone had pressed their forehead there, breathed, then wiped. The lake was cold enough to preserve, but not warm enough for breath. Not warm enough for fog. Not warm enough for fingerprints that looked fresh. I should have left then. I should have signaled up and ended the dive. Instead, I reached out. A diver's glove is thick, clumsy, but I extended my hand toward the driver's side window and placed my palm against it from the outside. The glass was cold through the glove. A dull numbness. I held it there. The lake held its silence. And from the inside, directly opposite my palm, a handprint appeared. Same size as mine, same spacing in the fingers, as if something had matched, as if something had been waiting to mimic. I jerked my hand back so fast my tether line snapped taut behind me. My breathing surged loud, ragged. The comms filled with static, and beneath it, I heard breathing again. Not mine. A second set of slow, measured breaths, like someone else sharing my air. I tried to speak, to tell the surface crew what was happening, but all that came out was a clipped sound. My throat wouldn't cooperate. The tapping resumed, closer now, more deliberate. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. Like a pattern. Like a message. The silt cloud thinned, and in the beam of my light I saw the driver's side window clearly again. The handprints hadn't faded. There were more now, some larger, some smaller. And one, near the lower edge of the glass, had fingers that looked too long. I didn't look at it for long. My eyes refused. My mind refused. Not real, real, not real. I yanked the line, the signal to pull me up, twice, hard, and for a moment, the line didn't respond. It stayed slack, as if nothing above was holding it. Panic tried to seize me fully then, the raw animal fear that training usually keeps behind a locked door. My chest tightened. My breaths became fast, shallow pulls that did nothing. Then the line tugged, gentle at first, then firm. The ascent began, but as I rose, I couldn't stop myself from looking down one last time. The car sat below, upright, patient. And through the windshield, just for a second, I saw movement. Not a hand, not a shadow, a face-shaped pale blur close to the glass. And something that looked like eyes, not staring out, but staring up. At me. As if it knew my name. They pulled me up faster than protocol prefers. I knew that by the way the water pressure changed too quickly, by the way my ears protested, by the way the surface rushed toward me like something eager. I should have signaled to slow it down. I didn't. I wanted out. When my head broke the surface, the sky looked wrong. Too wide. Too close. Like I'd come up into a photograph instead of air. Hands grabbed my harness again. Voices overlapped. Someone cursed. Someone asked if I was okay. Someone else asked what happened down there. I sucked in air like I'd forgotten how breathing worked above water. My regulator dangled uselessly as they stripped gear off me piece by piece. The cold didn't leave my body when the suit came off. It stayed. It settled somewhere deeper. I tried to speak. I tried to say something simple. I tried to say there were prints on the glass. What came out was, it followed procedure. That didn't make sense to anyone, including me. My supervisor knelt in front of me, eyes level, voice steady. He asked if I'd experienced equipment failure. He asked if I'd felt disoriented. He asked if I'd had visual disturbances. I stared past him at the lake again. Not real. Real. Not real. I said no. All lies. All necessary. They wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like old nylon and fuel. Someone pressed a cup of something warm into my hands. I didn't drink it. My fingers didn't feel like they belonged to me. The sheriff came back. He stood a little farther away this time, like he could sense the space around me wasn't safe. He asked what I'd seen on the second dive. I said the same thing I'd said before. The vehicle was intact. The windows were intact. The interior was obscured by silt. That last part was technically true. Everything had been obscured by something. They discussed whether to send another diver. Standard rotation would have meant someone else went down next anyway, but this time, there was hesitation. The lake still sat too still. The fog had thinned, but the air felt heavy, like it was pressing downward. One of the newer divers volunteered. He tried to make it sound casual. He said it was probably nothing. He said Superior plays tricks on depth perception sometimes. I don't remember standing up, but I did. The blanket fell away. My legs felt hollow. I told them no one else should go down. The words came out sharper than I intended. Too loud. Too final. They all looked at me, I tried to explain without explaining. I said visibility was worse than expected. I said the car wasn't stable. I said the sediment was shifting in unpredictable ways. I said it wasn't safe. Those were the kinds of objections people listen to. But my supervisor asked the question I'd been dreading. He asked if I was fit to continue. That's how it's phrased. Fit. As if the lake is a test you either pass or fail. As if whatever happens down there can be measured on a checklist. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I was fit to be anywhere anymore. I nodded anyway. They decided to delay the next dive. Not cancel. Just delay. Wait for conditions to change. Let the lake settle. The lake did not settle. As the hours passed, things around us began to feel slightly out of alignment. The sun moved across the sky, but the shadows on the water didn't shift the way they should. The boat rocked gently, but the motion didn't match the breeze. At one point, someone pointed out that our anchor line wasn't vertical. It angled off into the water as if being pulled sideways by a current we couldn't feel. We checked the readings. No measurable current. The sheriff took a phone call and stepped away. When he came back, his expression had changed. He said there had been a report. A missing person. A man hadn't come home the night before. Late 30s. Lived alone. Drove a sedan similar to the one we'd seen. They had a name now. That should have made things clearer. It should have given the situation a shape. Instead, it made something inside me recoil. Because the name didn't fit. I won't say it here. Not because it's private, but because saying it feels like inviting something closer. What I will say is that it was a name I recognized. Not from work. From somewhere older. From a memory that didn't belong in that place. I told myself it was coincidence. Names repeat. People overlap. The world isn't as big as we pretend. Not real. Real. Not real. They asked if I wanted to sit this one out. They asked gently. Too gently. I said no again. The plan changed slightly. The next dive would be brief. Just enough to confirm the vehicle identification. No rigging yet. Just verification. I should have refused. I know that now, but there was a pull I couldn't explain. Not curiosity. Not duty. Recognition. When I went down the third time, the descent felt wrong immediately. The light narrowed faster. The water seemed thicker, heavier, like moving through gel. My depth gauge ticked down too quickly, then seemed to stall. I checked it twice. It was working. The bottom appeared sooner than it should have. The car was closer now. Not in distance, but in presence. It filled my field of view too quickly, like it had moved up to meet me. I hovered just outside arm's reach, my body screaming at me to keep space. The windows were clear of silt now. Clear enough to see inside. There was no body in the driver's seat. No slumped shape. No bones. No clothing. The seats were empty. The interior looked wrong in a way that's hard to explain. Too much space. As if the car was larger inside than it should have been. Like the angles didn't match the exterior. I angled my light carefully, scanning for personal items. A jacket, a bag, anything that could confirm identity. That's when I saw movement in the back seat. Slow. Subtle. A shift of something pale behind the headrest. I froze again. The movement stopped. I waited. Counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. Then the glass fogged. Not all at once. In patches. Oval shapes appearing and fading like breath marks. From the inside. Not real. Real. Not real. The tapping started again, but this time it wasn't rhythmic. It followed my movements. When I leaned closer, it stopped. When I pulled back, it resumed, as if whatever was inside was aware of distance. As if it was testing boundaries. I raised my light toward the back seat. There were hands there, more clearly than before. They weren't pressed flat this time. They were curled slightly, fingers bent, as if gripping something I couldn't see. And behind them, deeper in the car, were more shapes. Not bodies. Suggestions of bodies, overlapping outlines like reflections in dark glass. I felt something brush my fin. I spun, heart hammering, light swinging wild. Nothing. Just open water. But the feeling remained. That sense of being crowded, of sharing space with too many presences. My comms crackled, and my supervisor's voice came through clearer than before. He asked for a status update. I opened my mouth to answer, and something else answered first. Not a voice, not words, a pressure change, a sudden gentle push against my chest, like a hand resting there. My breath caught. My body jerked back. The handprints on the glass changed. They slid, not dragging, not smearing. They repositioned, as if making room, as if inviting. I backed away, kicking hard, nearly losing control. The tether line pulled taut immediately this time, yanking me upward with force. As I ascended, the pressure in my chest eased. The water felt thinner. The light returned reluctantly. But before the car vanished from view completely, I saw one last thing. A hand lifted from the glass, not pressed. Raised. Palm outward. Not waving. Waiting. When I surfaced, no one asked questions right away. They didn't have to. My supervisor looked at my face and made the call. He signaled to abort operations. He told the sheriff we were done for the day. He said conditions weren't safe. The sheriff didn't argue. The lake stayed smooth as we packed up. The fog returned in thin strands, creeping low over the surface, reclaiming the space we'd disturbed. As we pulled away, I watched the water where the car lay beneath. And I had the strangest thought. That it wasn't sunk, that it was parked, that it had always been there, waiting for someone who belonged inside. Not real, not real. That night I didn't go home. I drove until the road curved away from the lake and kept going. I checked into a motel I'd never stayed in before, the kind with buzzing lights and thin walls. I lay on the bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fog on glass. Every time I opened them, I felt like I was still underwater. At some point, I realized my hands were pressed flat against the mattress. Fingers splayed, as if testing a surface, as if remembering pressure. I didn't sleep. I lay on that motel bed and listened to the building breathe. Old pipes knocking behind the walls, a heater clicking on and off with no rhythm. Footsteps in the hallway that stopped outside my door once, lingered, then moved on. Each sound felt amplified, like my ears were still tuned for water, still waiting for something to move where it shouldn't. When dawn came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like interruption. The light through the thin curtains was flat and gray, the kind that makes it hard to tell how much time has passed. For a few seconds after waking, I didn't know where I was. I reached for the edge of the bed, expecting the resistance of a car door, the cold certainty of glass. My hand met fabric instead. Not real. Real. Not real. I sat up slowly. My body ached in the dull, heavy way it does after a long dive, even though I hadn't been under since the day before. My ears rang faintly, a pressure that refused to equalize. When I swallowed, it didn't help. In the bathroom mirror, my face looked slightly wrong. Not injured, not pale, just unfamiliar, like I was seeing myself through a layer of water. I ran the tap and let it run longer than necessary. The sound was too sharp, too loud. When I cupped water in my hands and splashed my face, the cold made me gasp harder than it should have. For a moment, with my eyes closed, I felt the urge to hold my breath. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages, no updates from the unit. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel like I'd already been cut loose. I left the motel without checking out. I don't know why. I just knew I didn't want to answer questions. I didn't want to leave a record of staying somewhere, like I was trying to erase my own trail. I drove aimlessly at first, then found myself turning back toward the lake without consciously deciding to. The road signs felt familiar in the wrong way, like I'd driven them before in a different life. As I got closer, the air changed. Cooler. Damp. It carried that specific superior smell, clean and metallic and old. When the lake came into view, my chest tightened. The harbor looked empty. No tape. No boats. No flashing lights. Just water stretching out under a low sky, pretending nothing had happened. I parked farther back than I needed to, and walked the rest of the way. The gravel crunched under my boots, loud in the quiet. I half expected someone to call out to me, to tell me I wasn't supposed to be there. No one did. I stood at the shoreline and stared at the water. Not real. Real. Not real. I told myself I was there to think, to get perspective, to prove to myself that the lake was just a lake again. But my eyes kept drifting to the spot where we'd anchored. I knew it instinctively, even without markers. A sense of location that felt too precise to be guesswork. The surface was rippled now, a light wind passing over it. Sunlight flashed in broken patterns. From above, it looked harmless. I tried to imagine the car below. Tried to imagine it empty. Tried to imagine the hands gone. My phone buzzed. The sound made me flinch hard enough that I nearly dropped it. It was my supervisor. He asked where I was. He said the sheriff had called again. He said the missing person's family wanted answers. He said there were inconsistencies in the sonar data they couldn't explain. He asked if I'd be willing to come in and talk. I hesitated too long. He noticed. He asked if I was feeling okay. I said yes. Another lie. He said they were considering bringing in a different unit to assist, a team from farther inland. Less familiar with Superior, but more experienced with recoveries at depth. The idea of someone else going down there made my stomach turn. I told him I'd come in. When I hung up, I realized my hands were trembling again. I clenched them into fists and noticed something that made my breath catch. The skin on my palms looked pale, wrinkled, like they'd been submerged too long. I rubbed them hard against my jeans until the sensation faded. Not real. Real. Not real. At the station, everything looked the same. Same lockers. Same smell of disinfectant and old coffee. Same notices on the board about safety drills and equipment checks. But the way people looked at me had changed. They didn't avoid me. They didn't stare. They watched. Like they were trying to see something that wasn't visible yet. The sheriff was there again, seated in a small conference room with my supervisor. A folder lay open on the table between them. Photographs inside. I didn't need to see them to know what they were. They asked me to walk them through the dives again, step by step. No embellishment. Just facts. I did. Or I tried to. But the order kept slipping. I described things out of sequence. I contradicted myself without meaning to. I said the windows were clear, then said they were obscured. I said I saw nothing inside, then paused too long when asked to clarify. The sheriff's pen stopped moving. My supervisor leaned back, arms crossed. They asked if I'd experienced panic, if I'd ever had hallucinations before, if I was under any unusual stress. I wanted to tell them about the hands. I wanted to tell them about the pressure against my chest, about the matching handprint, about the way the lake felt aware. The words stayed locked behind my teeth, because if I said them, they'd become real in a way I couldn't take back. Not real. Real. Not real. Instead, I said I thought the car might be older than expected, that the sonar readings didn't make sense, that something about the depth was wrong. That was enough to shift the conversation. Enough to keep them focused on equipment and data and procedure. The sheriff closed the folder and stood. He said they'd proceed carefully. He said the family would be informed that recovery might take time. After they left, my supervisor asked me to turn in my gear. Just temporarily, he said. Standard protocol after a stressful incident. A few days off. Mandatory evaluation. I nodded like it didn't matter. But handing over my dive knife, my light, my harness felt like giving up parts of myself. Tools I'd trusted more than my own senses. As I left the station, I felt lighter in the wrong way. Untethered. That night, the dream started. I was underwater, but I didn't need to breathe. I stood on the lakebed beside the car, my boots sinking slightly into silt. The water around me was clear, clearer than it had ever been in real life. I could see everything. The car door opened soundlessly. Inside, the seats were empty. The space was wrong, too deep, stretching farther back than a sedan should allow. Hands lined the interior, pressed against every surface. Dashboard, windows, roof, all of them facing inward, waiting. In the dream, I understood something I hadn't before. The hands weren't trying to get out. They were holding something in. I woke with a gasp, my heart racing. The room was dark. The air felt thick. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I became aware of pressure against my palms. I was lying on my stomach, hands flat against the mattress, fingers spread wide, pressed. I pulled them back slowly and sat up. The sheets were cool. Too cool. I checked the clock, just past 3 in the morning. I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I sat at the small desk by the window and stared out at the parking lot. The light from a single lamp reflected on wet pavement, shimmering faintly. For a second, the reflection looked like rippling water. I thought about the missing man, about his name. About how familiar it felt. I thought about the car. And a thought surfaced that made my chest ache. What if it hadn't gone off the road by accident? What if it had been called? I pressed my palms against the desk, grounding myself in the solid feel of wood. Not real. Real. Not real. The next morning, my phone rang early. The sheriff's number. He didn't waste time. They'd found something in the records. A report from years ago. A single vehicle accident near the same stretch of road. A car that went missing in similar conditions. The driver had never been recovered. The make and model matched. The plate number didn't. I asked him what year. There was a pause on the line. Then he told me, and my knees nearly gave out. Because it was the same year I'd first joined the harbor unit. The same year I'd moved to this town. The same year a man with my name had been reported missing near Lake Superior. I told the sheriff he was mistaken. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said it calmly, like correcting a clerical error. Names get mixed up. Dates get crossed. Records decay. Everyone knows that. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he asked me to spell my full name. I did. There was a soft sound on the other end of the line. Paper shifting. A pen tapping once against a desk. He said the spelling matched. Not real. Real. Not real. I laughed then. A short, dry sound that surprised both of us. I told him that was impossible. I told him I'd been alive and working here for years. I told him I'd been standing on the dock with him less than 24 hours ago. He said he knew. He said that was why he was calling. The report was old, almost forgotten, filed before digital systems were consistent, before cross-referencing was automatic. A single vehicle accident reported by a passerby. Skid marks near the curve. No debris recovered. No witnesses beyond the initial call. The driver's name had been mine. Same first name. Same last name. Same middle initial. The address listed was wrong. An apartment complex that had been torn down years ago. The age was off by a few years too. But the photograph attached to the report, grainy and poorly scanned, showed a man who looked enough like me that my throat closed when he described it. I asked him to send it. He said he already had. When the email came through, I stared at the screen without opening it for a long time. My reflection hovered over the glass, warped and dim. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself this town reused names. I told myself the lake pulled the same tricks on paper that it did on sonar. Not real. Real. Not real. When I finally opened the file, the image loaded slowly, line by line. The face that emerged was mine in a way that hurt to look at. Not identical. Slight differences. The hair cut shorter. The eyes more tired. Or maybe that was projection. The scar on the left hand was there. Same place as mine. I closed the laptop hard enough to rattle the desk. For a while, I just sat there, listening to the hum of the room. Every sound felt like it was happening underwater, softened and distant. I tried to remember my past clearly. Childhood. School. The places I'd lived. The jobs I'd worked before the harbor unit. The memories were there. But they felt thin. Like copies of copies. When I focused on details, they blurred. Addresses slipped. Dates refused to line up. Faces of people I knew well became strangely featureless when I tried to picture them too clearly. I called my mother. The phone rang longer than it should have before she answered. Her voice was familiar. Warm. Concerned when she heard mine. I asked her questions without explaining why. Where did we live when I was 10? What color was the car she drove when I was in high school? When did I move out for the first time? She answered easily. Confidently. Relief washed through me, brief and sharp. Then I asked her if she remembered the year I moved to this town. She paused. Just for a second. But I heard it. She said she thought it had been later than that. She said she remembered visiting me here, but couldn't quite place when. She said maybe she was mixing it up with somewhere else. I laughed again, forced this time, and told her not to worry about it. I said I was just tired. After we hung up, the room felt smaller. I started noticing things I hadn't before. My reflection didn't always move when I expected it to. Just a fraction of a delay. Enough to make my stomach tighten. Water glasses left rings on the table faster than they should have. Dark circles spreading outward, damp and cold. When I washed my hands, I found myself watching the water bead on my skin. Watching how slowly it ran off. Watching how the wrinkles lingered. At the station, they told me to take leave. Mandatory, indefinite. They said it gently. They said it was for my own good. They said I'd been through something unusual and needed time. I didn't argue. I didn't trust myself to stay. I drove away from the lake again, farther this time. Inland. Away from water. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling of pressure. Like depth. Like weight. I checked into another motel. This one farther from the shoreline. Surrounded by trees and asphalt instead of open water. I chose a room on the second floor without thinking. That night, the dreams changed. I wasn't outside the car anymore. I was inside it. The space felt wrong immediately. Too wide. Too tall. The ceiling stretched up into shadow. The seats were lined with hands, layered one over another, palms outward. They weren't touching me. They were holding the shape of the car in place. I stood in the center, and for the first time, I felt fear not of what was around me, but of what would happen if they moved. I woke with my heart pounding and my mouth dry. The sound that woke me hadn't been internal. It had been tapping. Soft, patient. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. I sat up slowly and looked toward the window. Condensation fogged the glass from the inside. Not real. Real. Not real. The shape of a handprint bloomed faintly in the mist. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I waited. The print faded. When I finally crossed the room and wiped the glass, there was nothing there. No residue. No mark. But outside, in the dim parking lot, I saw something that made my breath hitch. A car parked directly beneath my window. A sedan. Same color. Same shape. I hadn't noticed it when I checked in. I told myself that was normal. People come and go. Cars park and leave. Nothing about it had to mean anything. Still, I watched it for a long time. It didn't move. In the morning, the car was gone. So were my keys. I found them later, placed neatly on the desk by the window. Damp. Cold. That was when I realized something I'd been avoiding. The inconsistencies weren't new. They'd just been quiet before. I pulled out the old certification cards I'd kept, the ones with my name and photo. The dates didn't line up cleanly anymore. Some overlapped in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Others left gaps I couldn't explain. I searched my name online. There were two of me, one with a shallow digital footprint, recent, scattered. One with an older presence that ended abruptly years ago, near Lake Superior. Same name. Similar face. Different outcome. I closed the laptop and sat back, my hands resting on my thighs. They pressed down slightly, as if testing the surface, as if remembering resistance. I thought about the hands inside the car, about how they hadn't been trying to escape, about how they'd been holding something in. And a thought settled into me. Slow and heavy. What if the lake hadn't taken that man? What if it had let him go? And kept something else instead? Not real. Real. Not real. That afternoon, my supervisor called. He said the inland unit had completed a preliminary dive. He said they'd located the car. He said there was something wrong with it. I asked him what he meant. He said the interior didn't match the exterior dimension. He said they were calling it off until they could reassess. Then he said something else, his voice low. He said one of the divers thought he saw movement inside. I thanked him and hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my hands. They looked steady, normal. But when I pressed my palms flat against the table, I felt a faint pressure pushing back, as if something on the other side recognized me. I don't remember agreeing. I remember standing up. I remember nodding once, like a reflex. I remember the feeling of something settling into place, the way pressure equalizes when you stop fighting it. They didn't escort me. They didn't need to. I knew where to go. The harbor looked different at night. Not darker. Deeper. The lights along the dock cast long, trembling reflections that broke apart and reformed as the water moved beneath them. The lake breathed quietly, almost politely, like it was pretending to be harmless. The boat was already prepared. No questions. No small talk. No radio chatter that didn't serve a purpose. They didn't give me my old gear. Not exactly. The suit fit too easily. The straps settled against my body like they remembered me. When I slid my hands into the gloves, the material sealed tight with a soft sound that made my chest ache. I stood at the edge of the dock and looked out. Fog hovered low again, thin enough to see through, thick enough to blur distance. The surface of the lake was smooth, broken only by the slow pulse of the boat against its lines. Someone asked if I was ready. I didn't answer. I stepped forward and let the water take me. The cold didn't shock this time. It welcomed. As I descended, the familiar narrowing returned. Light thinning. Sound dulling. The world above receding into something theoretical. Down. The lake felt closer now. Not just around me, but against me. Like hands cupping my sides, guiding my movement. My descent slowed without effort. Controlled, deliberate. I didn't follow a line. I didn't need to. The car was there, closer than before. So close I nearly collided with it. It sat at a slight angle now, as if the lake were easing it upward. The metal looked darker, older. The paint dulled to a color that barely registered. The windows were no longer clear. They were crowded, hands pressed against every surface, overlapping, intertwined, some large, some small, some too thin, some with joints that bent the wrong way, all facing inward, all holding. I hovered in front of the windshield. My reflection stared back at me, warped and broken by the glass and water. For a moment I saw two versions of myself layered together. One older, one newer, one tired, one empty. Not real. Real. Not real. The tapping started again. This time, it wasn't asking. It was counting. I drifted closer. The interior shifted as I approached, stretching, accommodating. The sense of wrongness intensified, like my mind was brushing against an idea it wasn't meant to hold. I placed my palm against the windshield. From the inside, a hand met it immediately. Same size. Same scar. Perfect alignment. The contact sent a shock through me. Not pain, but recognition. A memory unlocked. I remembered the moment of impact that never came. I remembered the water closing in. I remembered the others. Not strangers. Not exactly. People who had been called the same way I had. Drawn to the curve. To the fog. To the place where the road gives up. They hadn't drowned. They'd been held. The car door opened. Water flowed inside without turbulence, without chaos, like the lake had decided the rules no longer applied. The interior space expanded further, becoming something closer to a room than a vehicle. Hands lined the doorway, waiting. I moved forward. The moment I crossed the threshold, the pressure changed. The weight lifted from my chest and settled into my bones instead. The water inside was still, almost warm by comparison, heavy with presence. The hands did not touch me. They adjusted, closing ranks behind me. The door sealed. The sound was soft. Final. Inside. The lake felt distant. Muted. The car held. I understood then what my role had been. What it still was. A surface. A pressure valve. Something that could walk and speak and breathe while the space below remained stable. I had been a release. Now I was being returned. The hands shifted again, and for a moment I felt them pass through me. Not gripping, not restraining, just aligning, matching angles, correcting gaps. The interior grew smaller as they pressed inward, reclaiming space. I felt myself thinning, not disappearing, redistributing. Not real. Real. Not real. The last thing I remember clearly is the lake pressing against the glass from the outside. Patient. Waiting. Now. I don't know where this is being recorded. I don't know how long I've been speaking. The words come easily, like they've been practiced. Sometimes I feel resistance beneath my palms when I rest them on a table. Sometimes I feel the faintest pushback. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see fog on glass. If you're still listening, I need you to understand something. Cars still take that curve. Divers still go down, hands still press, and sometimes something comes back up. If you ever find yourself near Lake Superior and you see a car parked where it shouldn't be, windows dark, interior too quiet, do not touch the glass. Do not press your hands flat and wait for something to meet them, because if it does, not real. Real. Not real. Then there will be space again, and the lake hates empty space. I think I hear tapping now. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. I should stop here. I should.